So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever works best for you, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this ChatTalent webinar. This is the third in the series we've been doing in partnership with the team over at Appical. For those that don't know me, I'm Alan Walker. I'm the editor of ChatTalent, and I also consult with businesses on HR technology. Our speakers for today are Dr. Art Bontekoning and Bart Hessing. I'm sure I pronounced those both terribly incorrectly. And they're going to be talking about the gaps and similarities between generations in the workplace. You know, that millennial thing. Art is an organisational psychologist and a generational expert. He started studying generations in the 90s, and these studies resulted in the development of a generation theory and a unique generation research methodology. So he certainly knows his stuff. Those studies culminated in 2007 in a PhD thesis where he proved that successive generations have the power to keep the organisational culture that they're part of up to date. He supports ageing organisations to discover and use that power of generations. Next to that, he's also a speaker and an author, and his last book was titled The Power of Generations. Bart is a millennial researcher. He grew up in a multinational family business that provides fruit and vegetables for retailers, so he's always been close to big organisations and their processes. He did his degree in business administration, now studying for a master's in leadership and change management at the Free University in Amsterdam. He chose that master's so he could help organisations become future-proof, so they could update their culture and help make businesses millennial-proof, so to speak. So millennials will more enjoy work and be happier. Today is not going to be a crazy long presentation, but it's detailed, it's thorough, and the guys are going to be talking about some of the research they've done. But do feel free to ask questions as we go along. If you've got any, submit them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You should see it at the bottom of Zoom. Some will ask on the fly. Some of them will leave to the end. So that's enough of me. Art, Bart, over to you guys.
Thank you. Okay, so now you see that the amount of generations who are at work is increasing because we are aging in Europe, at least, and the older generations are more vital and will stay at work longer, and the youngest generations are walking in. So the last generation, Gen Z, will walk in within 1 or 2 years. So then we have 5 generations on the floor. And the oldest are the biggest, and the youngest the smallest. So that creates new questions, like how can we be attractive for millennials at the moment, for instance. Well, it's about similarities and gaps. And talking about gaps you can see in front of you most of the times. And most of the times it means that an outdated pattern is confronted with a fresh one. So, for instance, the way of decision-making, top-down decision-making, is from the last century, shortly saying, and the way new generations decide is more with them. But there's a really interesting similarity. If I ask the millennials to make a top 5, or what takes most of their energy away, and I ask the same thing to the older generation, they discover that they have the same top 5. So social patterns have an expiry date, and that means that at the moment that the expiry date is there, it's going to take energy away. Energy from the people who repeat them, but the younger generation is very sensitive for outdated patterns and react immediately to them. So the youngest generation is very skillful to scan outdated behavior. Generation research is not really easy to do. So you cannot do it with questionnaires. You can use questionnaires to learn more about a certain topic, but to find difference between generations, you need video analysis, because you cannot measure behavior. You can't measure values, for instance, with a questionnaire. So I do a lot with videotaping generations at work and then analyzing with the team what are the differences. Another similarity is that my experience are in the real world, not outside the company, but in the company, in a project, for instance. And when I stimulate the youngest generation to do a project in the way that gains most of their energy, that's the way of refreshing old patterns in communication and decision making, etc. And when they are going over the boundary of the existing culture with their updates, you see that the energy of the older generations is going up also. Now we are going to the millennials themselves. So because really, I had a lot of sessions with the parents, and I asked them to talk about their children, and then you see that the way of parenting is creating the fundament of the generations. Parents are educating the children in another way than they are educated. And that creates new ways of communication and cooperation and leadership, etc. For instance, the parents of the millennials are stimulating to be themselves, to be authentic, to make the choices themselves, to find out what are the talents, etc., etc., etc. They won't tell the children what to do, but they stimulate them to do it. Another interesting point is that every next generation of today that can change in the future is higher educated. And in that education, they learn to think themselves. So they don't need managers to think for them. They can think themselves. They need managers and leaders to support them. Another interesting point is that every next generation of the generation who are alive and at work at the moment is more feminine. Which means that the focus of this generation is more than of former generations on relationships and processes. So that's certainly something that shapes the millennial generation. And now we go to the research. Can you say something?
Yeah, I'll say something about our research we did last year. We did together with Appical. CareerWise, that's an organization that provides trainings to young professionals, especially millennials these days. Jasper Scholten, that's a millennial expert, and Aad sitting next to me. We did a research, and our target was to get a clear completion about energizers, so what gives you energy for a millennial, and what takes you energy drainers for millennials. And what we saw, the research group saw that there's been a lot of research done on millennials. So we already know many things. We know that they like development. We know that they like purpose in life, and work-life balance is important. And for example, that most millennials struggle with expectations. So organizations and people know that, but what we saw is it's very hard to get those terms and wishes in practice. And therefore we decided to go for a clear completion of those terms. These completions we have gained now. We have more than 3,300 respondents collected, and over more than 100 organizations. So that are big multinational firms, but also governmental firms and healthcare organizations. Every organization we have in our research. And it was a big success in Holland. We target to get 1,000 respondents, but went over 3,000 because so many organizations struggle with the same problem. They want to do something for the millennials. They know more or less what they want, but they don't get it in practice. And that's what we made. We're at the moment writing a white paper about our results, and the Dutch version is almost done, and English version will be around October. So we will get an action with all our results and give those to the organizations. And now I'll zoom in some of the results we found. For example, the climate of work for millennials. We all know that's very important in our work environment. But our figure shows that colleagues are the most important things for millennials, not the corporate culture or so. So corporate culture is determined by the colleagues and the worksphere. So you have cooperation with colleagues is very important. You see, it's the most important. Besides that, the relationship with colleagues is the most important for millennials. So we asked in our questionnaire, we asked the most important thing at workforce is for you, and then they could select an answer. But when you see, go back to the 10 years ago, then you see that most organizations were focused on financial results. And there's also logic, because then was financial crisis, organizations had to do it to survive. These days, when organizations have to spend more money, and they can spend more money, they mostly spend it on innovation, digitalization. But what we see is that the social aspects of organizations get more and more important. That's what really energizes millennials. So please, organizations, pay some attention to that.
And that means more openness.
More openness,
feedback,
working together, and working together is also very important. And to targets. Millennials like targets, so get relationships together and work on a target or goal.
On equal food. Yeah.
On equal food.
What's really interesting there, guys, is the 2% for the workplace piece. We constantly see across social media and people talking about these amazing offices they've got with slides and bean bags and baristas and all that kind of stuff that people assume has been driven to a certain extent by millennials wanting these things. But the stats here, the research here clearly shows it's not all that important to them.
No, it isn't. And it can also be shown by our next figure about autonomy and millennials. Because I think when you ask most organizations, do you provide your millennials with autonomy? They say, yeah, we're very flexible. We give them own workplaces. They can decide whatever they're going to work. They can schedule their own hours. So yeah, we're very flexible. But our results show that are by far not the most important things. Only 13% and 2% selected that in our questionnaire. Most important is the execution of your work. So millennials want freedom in the way how they can operate, how they can do their work. That's what autonomy is for them. Besides that, another nice figure where you can make a nice link is the clear frameworks, the yellow-orange slide, the clear frameworks and feedback along the way. That's also very important in autonomy. It sounds contradiction, but you can make it very clear. So they like frameworks. Millennials want to know what you expect from them and where they're responsible for. There are two very important things. Those things give them a sort of framework because they are young, they're energizing, they want to do everything at the same time. That also gives a struggle. So give them a framework with boundaries like where they're responsible for, what do you expect from them, make it very clear. And within that framework, let them go, let them free, give them targets and let them decide how they work through that target. How they work. And you will be amazed with the output they deliver. That's some fundamental important for millennials. So not only work hours and workplace.
And interesting there as well, that being able to be themselves at work. How are they describing that? What does that actually mean, being themselves at work, in your mind?
What you see in my generation thing, it's not, we are raised by the thought that it's not that strange if you are gay. It's good if you come out for that. We respect everyone, no matter your race or so. Just be yourself. That's very important for our generation. And we also respect that at the work floor. So that's what I want. And please do whatever you want, feel free. And respect is, I think, in my generation, something that's very common and more accepted.
And at present point, the personal development is more important for your generation than professional development.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. We asked what kind of development. You see in the left corner, left under. You see, we asked what kind of development. We know you like development. With which kind of development is that? Is it personal, professional, spiritual, support by development? And 65% selected personal development over professional development. So professional development is maybe something more from the older generation, like the pragmats. And so millennials have to focus on personal development, focus on development and strengths, weaknesses, and be themselves and work for that. So we asked also, what did you get at your work? Is it mostly personal development, professional development? And that was professional development. So most organizations focus on professional development. Well, that's not the most important thing for a millennial. And of course, from an organization perspective, you can say something that you focus on professional development, but also please pay attention for personal development. But that's what the millennials really want.
I guess that professional development now, we're in a different world, aren't we? Knowledge is so accessible. Learning how to do things, learning skills, etc., is so much more accessible now in any part of the world. As long as you've got access to the internet, pretty much you can learn anything to a certain degree. You won't necessarily become an expert, but you can learn simple skills and ways and methodologies of doing things. So that kind of professional development is so easy to access in their own time or at will. Personal development is a completely different matter. That's what takes much longer, much more time, and actually probably needs more guidance and more accessibility to the right kind of coaching and mentoring, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing what we discovered is that we want to be satisfied and making a difference. So what gives you energy is, we found out that is making goals, working through targets. That's what I found about purpose. That's the most purpose from not being sustainable, work for an organization with a clear mission, or help the environment. That's also important, of course, but the most important thing our research shows that millennials want to work to targets. So that's also very easy to give to a millennial as work. So that's very easy to complement. Then we go,
and the word "out of the box" is used
out of the box
a lot of the times. So they want to stay in the ongoing culture, but have the space and the support to go over the boundaries. Just not adapt to the ongoing ways of decision making or searching or cooperation, but looking over the boundaries. And at that moment, they need support from experienced colleagues, because you can feel pretty uneasy if you are on the boundary of the company and go over it, because colleagues will react to that. But there they find new ways, and there they find the difference to contribute to the results, I think. Shall we go to the next?
Maybe something about expectations only.
Oh, yeah.
Because we know that a lot of millennials struggle with expectations, burnout, and so on. So we were curious, where do they come from? Where do the expectations come from? So we asked the millennials, with which expectation from who or what do you struggle the most? And more than 60% answered that question, but the expectations I suffer the most from are the expectations of myself. So they make it themselves very hard at work and in their lives. And when we asked further on that, we asked, which expectation of yourself do you struggle the most with? Then they answered the question with the perfectionism, being always perfect. So you can say that this generation wants to do everything perfect, so they're very perfectionistic, also in their work. But it's very hard to be perfect in an imperfect world, in a world that's outdated, where you live in an outdated organization with outdated cultures, with much of bureaucracy and hierarchy. If you want to do things perfect, that's almost imperfect in those organizations and climate.
And it takes your energy away. Burnout will raise there.
It will raise your energy.
There where the perfect millennials work in a not perfect surroundings, you find most burnouts.
Well, it's that again caused by society that we live in now. So we constantly, people are being hammered by people talking about how incredibly good looking they are, how amazing they are at sport and music and professional life, how they've achieved everything they want to achieve, they're incredibly wealthy, incredibly successful. And people see that all the time across social media and online and think that that's what I need to aspire to, but that's not really realistic.
We don't know, I think. Because
it's hard.
The expectation for friends on social media doesn't matter at all. So why they want to be perfect, we don't know yet exactly. It's not in the social media. It's not because of the friends say so. It's not because the manager says something. It is something inside them. So we don't know how that happened.
Because we also asked, is it maybe from social media? That was also one of the answers. There were only 3% selected that answer. So that's by far not the most.
Okay, interesting.
Well, it can be something in society that we expect a lot from each other, to be perfect, high quality, etc. So that could be that we are stressing ourselves and the others to be more and more perfect. That's possible, maybe. We don't know exactly yet.
Open minds.
Yeah, because the reality is that most millennials, maybe 80 or 90% of them, are starting their job in aging organizations, and not aging for a couple of years, but that aging will go forward till around 2035. So, and they're not prepared for that. So, because aging, you can look at an aging organization in different ways. It's packed with experience, so that is really interesting for them to learn a lot, and they love to work with the oldest colleagues who have passion for the work, for instance, and then it goes very well from both sides, because those older guys notice that they can learn something from the youngsters, make them feel younger, etc., etc. But it can go very wrong if the elderly colleagues, the seniors, start repeating those outdated ways of communication and gathering and decision making and acting with diversity without awareness. So the open minds is something that they appreciate very much. So if you behave in a kind of old-fashioned way, that doesn't matter so much. But if your mind is closed for the feedback from millennials, then they feel powerless or something like that. I think when we go to the next slide, you have an overview. And this is also a kind of a trap. When we look to all the results of the research, you can build an image of what is attractive for millennials and what is not attractive at all. And then we meet a lot of managers, HR managers, who try to do the best to become millennial proof. So that costs a lot of money and a lot of doing things and change process, etc. That is not really, I think, the way. The way is more that support the millennials, because they have the updates for the ongoing culture, to support the millennials to create their updates in their work environment. That is a better way to open up for them than do it for them. And that has a strong connection with the way they are parented, because parents did exactly the same. And they were very successful in that. I think the parents of today are very successful in education of their children. In the interaction between parents and children, they create fresh patterns, so to say. Because if you try to act in an old-fashioned way, for instance, hierarchical to your child, you have the feedback directly. And the parents stimulate the children to do things most of themselves. So that's why the millennials can be supported very well by experienced colleagues in updating their teams and organizations. They cannot do it on their own. They need that support from their colleagues very much. So as you look from both sides, you see that one is kind of contrary to the other ones. I repeat what I said before. If you support the millennials to update the social processes in the organization, your organization will not only be more attractive for millennials, but also for the other colleagues and for clients. If you walk in a shop which is old-fashioned and the energy is low, you walk out. If you walk into a shop where the energy is high and the eyes are bright, then you try to walk in, and the organization is exactly the same. Want to say something to it?
No, I think it's complete.
Yeah. Next slide is, well, should I tell something about the gap?
Yeah, go.
Because we can talk about gaps in a meeting room, and the most important thing, I think, is that you recognize the gap in front of you. So if the millennials work together with the other generations, then you can see the gap in front of you. Because if an outdated way of doing and acting is there, and the millennials are becoming silent and the energy is floating away, then there is the gap. So if an experienced colleague is seeing it and he is asking the millennial, what is happening? I see that your energy is floating away. What can we do to get it back? The gap. You dichter?
Close.
You close the gap. The other way around, I stimulated millennials to feel free to ask any question when they cooperate with the older colleagues. And the interesting point is when they stand up and ask questions spontaneously, they also bridge the gap, so to say. So when older colleagues see that the energy is floating away and they don't do anything, and millennials are drawing themselves back, then the gap will be there. And they only can solve that by themselves. That is not, managers can support it, but cannot do it for them. So I think in today's workforce, with all those different kind of generations, bridging the gaps all the time has profit for everybody, for the older and the younger colleagues.
Maybe I can add to that, as what we also saw in our questionnaire, is that millennials are very creative and innovative. So they have those updates in there. They know exactly what organizations need to do to be future-proof. But it's for a manager, it's very precise to use that creation and innovative. Because when you, as a millennial, I experienced by myself, if you come up with new ideas, and you go to your manager and say, hey, maybe we can do this on a better or effective way, or let's try this again. When you do that 4 times and only thing you manage to say, okay, good idea, you do nothing with it, okay, I will look at it, and you hear nothing more about it, then the 5th time you'll think by yourself, okay, I see something that can be done different, but why should I mention it? Or they do nothing with my idea. So as a manager, please support those ideas, because if you do it a couple of times, you don't do it a couple of times, the innovation and creative drains away exactly, and you will keep in those outdated structure where everything goes the same for tens of years.
But as a millennial, you can also bridge the gap by asking after the 2nd time, why are you not doing something with my idea? Yeah. I don't understand why, etc. So I think it can come from both sides. So I think more millennials has, maybe that's an idea that they are supported at the university and schools to be prepared to work in those aging organizations. I have seen many seniors who really want to work with the millennials, but don't know how to do. So you can learn that from each other, probably.
It's a kind of 2-way street.
Yeah. Bridging the gap from 2 ways is really possible. Yeah.
Just one question on this whole gap piece. So, is the gap between? I'm not quite a millennial. I'm just about 5-6 years too old by your definition of a millennial. Is there a gap between me and millennials any bigger than the gap between me and my father's generation, for example? Is it blatantly larger, or is this something that every generation goes through?
Well, what is different is what it is about. For instance, the gap between the boomers and the older generation was that they had to be silent, and they want to talk and they want to discuss with them, etc. So that communication went on. And the gap between millennials and the older generation, that they want to have the freedom to work in the way. And if you are not open for that, then there is the gap. It doesn't matter what your age is. There are people from around 70 who are open for the millennials, and then there is no gap. But if somebody around 60 or 63 or 40 is saying, you have to do it my way, then there is the gap. If you support the millennials to do it in their way, then the gap is bridged. You understand what I'm saying?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
One other question I've had was, so the kind of definition of a millennial, it's kind of anybody, your definition is born from between 1985, 1999 or year 2000? The kind
2000. Yeah, 2000. That,
ish. So there's a 15 year.
Yeah, wisdom of 15 years. Yeah.
There's a lot of difference between a 18, 19-year-old who was born in 2000 and somebody who's 33, 34 years old, born in 1985. Is kind of grouping them all together in itself a little kind of risky, or is it the only way of doing it?
Well, yeah. And adding to that, we really don't know why that rhythm of 15 years is there, but it is mentioned many times in the literature of the last 2 centuries. So we said, well, we don't know why it is a rhythm of 15 years, but let's use the rhythm of 15 years. And we asked thousands of people, do you recognize the rhythm and do you recognize the characteristics of the generation? And about 80% said yes. And that's right, because 20% of the people don't have any connection with the generation. Some have a connection with all generations. And the interesting point for me is if you look at generations and social behavior, social processes, you see a kind of evolution of leadership, for instance, and decision making and communication. So it is a kind of medium, a kind of techniques to see the evolution of behavior. And if you see it, you can support it. If you don't see it, some people don't see it, you cannot support it. So we support the companies to see the difference and use it. And not mind the gap, but we are now talking about the millennials. But I could also talk about the seniors of today who differ from the seniors of 15 and 30 years ago and ask them what is giving you most of your energy. And then it comes out what their contribution is to the evolution of behavior. So every generation is focusing on another part of the culture to keep that culture what they are part of up to date.
Excellent. So why, in your mind, Artibald, why is there so much attention on millennials? Why is this such a emotive topic?
Well, that's a really interesting point. Maybe we understand or we feel that it could be one reason that the world is in transformation. Some people say we have not only an economic crisis or system crisis, which means that all the systems need to update. Probably we sense or we feel instinctively that the millennials could push that transformation in a good direction. And what I have seen, they can do it with support of the older generations. Another issue is that the most companies in Europe are aging spectacular. And the youngest generation is the smallest. So the smallest generation need more attention and support to keep that organization where everybody is working at up to date. So that maybe that's why we have more attention for the millennials. They will stay the smaller generation next decades. They will be the big, because every next generation so far is smaller than the former one. So when they are in the leadership phase between 45 and 60, then they are the biggest. That takes some time.
Okay, excellent. I've got some more questions. You carry on. Carry on with your presentation, and I'll come to those in a second.
I want to say something more about the organization we work with. That was CareerWise. That's an organization that provides training for young professionals and millennials. And they also make traineeships for millennials. They have very expertise in their business. But also Appical. And Appical has a pre- and onboarding app. And that's important for all generations, not only for millennials, but I will say something more about onboarding. Start the boarding before the work day. What you see mostly that you get a new job or you get a new function, and then the day you start with accepting and getting into the environment. That's on the first day you already started working. An onboarding app provides that training and that support before you start working. So you're a full employee before your first work day. You get to know the culture, you get to know how things work in your organization, you know who the CEO is, you know who your colleagues are. So that gives you, as a new employer or employee, is very more confident to go to your work. And also it's of course beneficial for your employer. You get new employees speed up 75% faster. And you also can monitor the progress of your new employee because they have an interaction part in their app. So with all those benefits, you strengthen your employer brand and your employee. So that's what the things I wanted to add about Appical.
There's my last book, The Power of Generations, and in that book I share everything I found. I shared the generation theory and the methodology to do generation research, and I share in this book, it's from 2017, last year, is published, everything I know about generations and about generation research. Because there are not many people in the world who really, I did get my doctorate around this issue, and I looked around the world because I thought, well, there must be other people who want to do the same, but I didn't find anyone. And that made it difficult for me to find a real methodology to do generation research. And I repeat it, I asked a generation, a group of 6, to make a top 5 of what gives the most energy at work. There they find their updates, and I ask them to make a top 5, what is taking the energy away, and then you have an image of what is outdated in the culture, and every generation has the same top 5. That's an interesting point. But the way they are making that top 5 is analyzed also, because they are working together in their generation rhythm. So if I videotape a generation, the same generation, in 10 completely different companies, then I find repetition of social patterns, and then I have catched the generational characteristics.
Excellent.
Maybe I say for something more about, let's say, in touch. If you think, the research we just spoke about is interesting, or I want to have some more information about it, please email me or connect with social media, LinkedIn, to my name, Bart Hessing. I'll be happy to help your organization. To get answers on those questions, we answer for Dutch organizations, but it's still possible. The research is still going on. We have our questionnaire also in English, so that's no problem at all. If you say, I also want those answers for my organization specific, we can give you that. We did it because we see differences in answers for example, the social branch, or for large firms. They do differ. They really do. Also, even between organizations in the same branch. So that's very interesting to see those different answers and conclusions based on the organization. And of course, you can make it more in practice and do something with those answers we provide you. So if it's interesting, please contact us.
And Bart, are we going to be able to give the results of the white paper itself out to everybody who's signed up for the webinar and the webinar series? Is that something we can do?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Perfect. So we'll get that out. So we've got 2 or 3 minutes or so. So just a couple of quick questions from the audience, if that's okay. So the first one's from Andrew. How does remote working and technology impact millennials? As clearly this is something that's on the rise. Is that changing how people feel about work and relationships and things like that? And is that having an impact of some kind?
Well, I think it's more the other way around, because there are a lot of technical innovations, and millennials pick the innovations that are improving their interaction, and they are very interactive with each other. They use those technical innovations to connect more to each other and others and clients, etc. And of course, they are the forerunners in using social media. We asked also on children, for instance, what they learned at and from their grandparents and parents. So then you see that they are front runners. However, the largest growing group in WhatsApp are 60+ people. So there's a kind of delay. So it looks like the millennials are front runners, the younger generation in using social media, and the other generation is following that and taking it over when they find out that it works pretty well.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether Andrew's point there is technology is great for connecting people from afar and reaching out to thousands of people almost and building relationships.
Yeah.
But is it the same as being in person with somebody and that kind of physical contact, the kind of emotional contact you have by being in with somebody rather than being remotely from somebody using a screen of some form or other tech.
And going back to one of the first slides, the most important impact on a new generation are the way they are parented. Around between 12 and 15 years old, the characteristics of the generation are there. The fundament is there of a generation. And of course they develop themselves, but I don't think it is really the social media, for instance, does not really have a high impact on the characteristics of millennials.
Okay. And next question then. So this person, I'm not sure their name, it's a kind of abbreviated code almost. They said that clearly it's easy for companies to promote professional development. You know, you get some courses, you push it out to your team, they go, great, thanks. But personal development can be a little harder. What can companies do to promote that in your mind?
Now, what we also saw on personal development is a very broad term. We found we always try to find a clear conclusion of those terms, but we saw that on professional development it was very hard because most millennials thinks other or different on personal development. So you need that interaction with those persons. You need to ask which personal development do you find most important. Is it find your strengths or want to know where you are? So find that interaction and make it personal specific.
So talk to the individuals and learn from them, or as a company learn from them, and then shape personal development programs around those individuals.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting that they find personal development so important. It might be that they understand somehow that being a developed person, then you find your way in the world, and not from a profession, because profession could be changed all the time, next decades. And dimensional cooperation is also important for everybody. And then you need also your personal skills to cooperate with each other. So cooperation might be much more important than develop professional skills. Maybe, I'm not sure, because good architects are really important too, but they also cooperate with other disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to say something, Bart?
Yeah, well, I think about personal development is millennials strive to be happy in life. They grew up in an environment very good, and maybe I think we also have more the possibility to get the most out of your life compared to all generations and be happier. So there's a focus, and I think the personal development you can make a connection to find happiness and to achieve that. So they are constantly busy with it. But I will make short note about it, that for most millennials, maybe it sounds familiar to that. Yeah, I'm also strive to be happy as possible and struggle it always. Please first find out what happiness is, because it's a very complex goal. I have it by myself. I strive for always to be as happy as possible, but it's very hard to strive to something or achieve something if you don't know what it really is. So read some books about it. Yeah, get really through that strange concept of happiness, and after that you know what it is. Please strive to it, and you'll see it's a vision of how you live your world.
So one last question. We'll need to finish in a minute or so. The slide you showed where it's the what matters, where you broke down the different elements of what were important to millennials into your pie chart. Did you ask those same questions to other generations as well? Because it'd be interesting to see the difference between the two.
No, we haven't yet.
Okay.
Still work to do.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how much of a delta there is between those.
For sure.
Well, and the most important difference we found is that the older generations because they have done their work in their way for maybe 15 or 20 years, and that they have the tendency to repeat it even when it takes their energy away. And younger generations scan that immediately and see it earlier than the older generations. And when the older generations open up themselves for the updates of millennials, they take them more or less over. So I think that those processes are more interesting than exactly know what the characteristics are of each generations.
Interesting. Listen, guys, we've overrun by a couple of minutes or so, so we're going to wrap things up now. Thanks everyone for your questions, really appreciated. Are there any kind of closing comments you want to make, Art or Bart, before we say goodbye to everybody?
I hope you learned something from Generations and the Gap.
And don't do it for them, but support them to do it themselves. And it means updating and going over the boundary of the cultures in a way that is healthy for everybody and is giving energy to old and young generations.
Excellent. Wise words. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, audience, everybody who dialed in, and we'll get the follow up to this out shortly. So there'll be the slides, there'll be the recording of the webinar, and then a little later, a few weeks down the line, we'll send out the white paper as well of Art's study. Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.